this evening, we're really excited to give you an update on the behavior science study we spoke about a little bit at our last meeting. And the public engagement efforts for Innovate 680 include conducting a behavior science study. And as many of you know, there are many sources of data available to us about how people travel along the 680 corridor. We have origin and destination data, average speeds, travel times, but that data doesn't always tell us the full story. It can tell us what happens, but not why, not why people make the choices they make and kind of what different things are happening in their life that has them make those choices. So that's what we're really trying to get at through this behavior science effort. And this evening, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Krawiec with Convey Inc. She's leading the public engagement and research efforts with the assistance of Root Solutions and EMC Research. And we're really excited to share with you what we've learned from our recent surveys. So with that, Rebecca, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can everyone hear me and can everyone see a slide that says behavior science update? Okay, great.
Yes.
So thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Happy to be here to share some of our exciting research with you. And what I'm going to do first is just start with a few quick overview slides about the research in general, and then we're going to take a dive into some of the data. So first of all, just to recap, our behavior research scope included some key deliverables, including landscape analysis reports on each of the Innovate 680 projects, which basically helped us identify some gaps in available research, a behavior drivers analysis phase, which is where the user analysis survey fits in, which we're going to talk about today. And then finally, we're going to prepare some intervention recommendations that will help us build better projects and encourage mode shift. So first of all, that first deliverable was the landscape analysis reports, as I mentioned, and these reports were extremely helpful in showing us where there were gaps in what was available worldwide and nationwide. And the gaps in the research is what we were hoping to fill with our user analysis survey. So we designed our survey specifically for the Innovate 680 program to collect detailed transportation behavior data to support our program. And we gathered information on a lot of different topics, but mostly about how people travel and how people might like to travel. Now, a few key points about our methodology, just to show you how we administered the survey. First of all, we used an address-based sampling system, which involved mailing invitations to a random selection of 50,000 households along the corridor. And we did a desired radius around that corridor, and it was administered between November 2020 and January 2021. Our survey was offered online and in print and in multiple languages. It took approximately 20 minutes to complete, and it covered multiple topics of interest to the Innovate 680 program. And one of the true strengths and differentiators of this study is that we have the ability to sort of dig into some psychological components like attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions about travel in the corridor. Our goal was to get 1,500 surveys completed, and we reached that goal in early January. We were also very pleased to see that out of the survey respondents, 1,000 of them agreed to be contacted for future research, and 950 of that 1,000 agreed to link their survey data to future travel data. This will be immensely helpful to the project team in demonstrating the success of our efforts on the Innovate 680 program. At the end of the survey, we gave respondents a chance to provide feedback, and most of what we received was very positive, as you can see here. Corridor residents in general just seem very excited to be participating in the future of transportation in Contra Costa, so that's great news. Now a few key demographics about the respondents to our survey. So first of all, our survey takers were well distributed among male and female, and their ages were mostly over the age of 35. Now we looked into census data for the county, and we find that these demographic data points are very representative of the county as a whole. The majority of our respondents are homeowners, with an average home having roughly 2 of everything: 2 people, 2 smartphones, 2 driver's license, and 2 cars. Interestingly, the households have 1.5 bikes, which I didn't add here because it didn't fit my theme of 2. Digging just a little deeper into smartphone ownership, our survey showed that 97% of corridor residents own a phone and 92% own a phone countywide. And just to be clear, by smartphone, what we mean are those phones that can connect to the internet. All right, now we've covered some of that intro information about our respondents. We're going to take just a closer look at some of our target audiences. And the first one is that 70% of corridor residents that use the corridor once per week or more. This is a very broad category that we're going to narrow into a smaller target group a little bit later in the presentation. So the most commonly used mode for this target audience was driving alone in a personal vehicle, as shown here. But we want to note that respondents were asked to select all pre-COVID modes that were used. So that tells us that driving alone was certainly the most popular answer, but people did use other modes during COVID or pre-COVID as well. It was encouraging to see, however, that 68% of those drivers have at least some interest in driving less. And that's identified by the 2 bars on the right. It was also interesting to see why respondents wanted to drive less, and concern for the environment ranked highest, as you can see here, but it was followed closely by not wanting to sit in traffic and reducing stress. We also asked people to write any possible perceived benefit they could think of to using alternative modes. And then we coded those answers into the categories shown here. Again, environmental impact ranked higher than others. We also asked those who are not interested in driving less why they're not interested. And here's how their responses were ranked. I just want to quickly draw attention to the 32% of these drivers who do not see a way to drive less. That's the 3rd circle from the right there. This was an interesting parallel to another stat that is shown on my next slide. And this slide shows people who are interested in driving less. And again, 1/3 of them don't believe it is possible for them. This is really interesting to us because it suggests that a similar percentage for both groups, those who are interested in driving less and those who are not interested in driving less, have a similar perceived ability around this topic. So we feel that this perception is definitely something we can work with and tackle similarly for both groups. Here are just some quick comments submitted by survey takers about why they believe it's not possible for them to take alternative modes. And we'll certainly be looking deeply into these barriers and figuring out ways to reduce those barriers. Now, I want to highlight an interesting study that gets at that perceived ability that we were just looking at. So a few years ago in Durham, North Carolina, they did a study where they used a combination of incentive programs to get people out of their cars and into transit. With one program, personalized route maps were emailed to people to show how they can use alternative modes of transportation to get from their home to their work. Another program offered a chance at a weekly cash prize for taking the bus. And both strategies showed or proved to be very popular. And actually, among those who received the personalized commute map, there was a 12% reduction in driving to work alone, compared to those who did not receive that personalized map. And what we saw as a group across our mode shift research was that a personalized system or map or something personalized for drivers really helped them shift modes. It was even a bigger incentive than cash. So this slide confirms from a motivation perspective that between our larger group of corridor residents there on the left and our subset of people interested in driving less, money is not really the most important factor. Essentially, cost isn't really what's keeping from people using alternative modes, but really time is actually a more important factor. So we've explored a bit about that larger target audience of drivers in the corridor, and now we want to narrow that audience and look a little closer at a subset that we might have the most success with behavior change. And we've given this high priority audience a name. We're calling them our champions of change. And these are daily drivers who are interested in driving less. So this is compared to the other audience we talked about where they take the corridor once per week or more. Our champions take the corridor daily, but they're interested in driving less. And this high impact group makes up 44% of all of our corridor drivers. So our champions tend to live in cities throughout the corridor, with Concord and Clayton being the outliers with the highest and the lowest percentages of champions. Our champions appear to be clustered in the middle age groups, with 70% of them being within the age range of 35 to 64. We also want to note that, again, the champion gender split was pretty much right down the middle, 50-50, men and women. Now the question becomes, what behaviors or modes are we interested in changing from and changing to? So as we saw above, the favored mode among our target audiences, including our champions, is driving alone in a personal vehicle, better known as single occupancy vehicles, as many of us know. And these are major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and poor air quality. A typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. And it takes 6 acres of US forest land to counteract this emission. So switching away from SOVs to alternative modes would have important and positive impacts on congestion and the environment. Studies have shown that public transit, carpooling, walking, or biking all help reduce the volume of motorized vehicles on the road. So with this in mind, our goal is to take our champions of change and motivate them to shift modes. And that helps us narrow our questions just a bit to what modes would yield the most new users and what modes would yield the least. So we asked our champions about their likelihood of using a variety of new and alternative modes. And here's how they answered. So first of all, I am not able to advance at the moment. Okay, hold on. Let me try one different method, sorry. There we go. Our champion group responded that they would be most interested in trying telecommuting and carpooling with household members, but private bus, shuttle, BART, and public bus and rail were close behind the top two. The modes least likely or of least interest to our champions included bike share and van pool. We also explored what percentage of our champions have used alternative modes at least some of the time in the past. So that could have been 1 time or 2 times or 3 times. We feel that we can work with these groups to maintain or increase the use of each of these modes. So we understand it's not just about getting brand new users to try something, but to get those people who are over that first ride hurdle to keep using that mode of travel. Finally, among our champions, we were curious about the perceived barriers to using alternative modes. We also wanted to see how it looked against our interested driver group, which was that 68% we highlighted earlier in the deck. So this slide highlights the perceived barrier of availability of alternative modes. There were several perceived barriers that we looked into, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but the big takeaway with these next few slides is that with each of the perceived barriers, the champions and the interested drivers ranked almost similarly. And when the barrier went down in popularity, or it was less of a barrier for people, the percentages fell the same, almost the same for each. So this is the perceived barrier of availability. Next, we have the quality of travel. Again, fairly high, but very similar between the two groups. Then comfort is where the barrier started to fall. So it's less of a barrier to our champions of change and our interested drivers. Same with safety. Personal circumstances also ranked sort of low. And then finally, cost, which is also reflected in some of the earlier stats that I showed you. Cost is not necessarily a main barrier. So these barriers are things that through the Innovate 680 program and its projects, we're going to work to mitigate so that these perceived barriers are no longer an issue for those who want to shift modes. So that segues sort of nicely into my final section here, where we want to give a snapshot of how our behavior research is helping us to develop the Innovate 680 projects better so that the barriers are lessened and mode shift is made easier and even more attractive. I'm focused today on 3 of the 6 projects, but there's more to come on all 6 of the projects. So first, our behavior research showed that nearly half of corridor residents combined different modes of transportation for a single trip in the year prior to COVID. Our Shared Mobility Hubs project is designed to make combining modes easier. We learned that a majority of our audience is very interested in using hubs and that they're willing to walk or bike up to 15 minutes to get to a hub. That 67% want frequent and reliable transit, and 58% are interested in on-site security. We also asked potential new riders what transit features would be most interesting to them, and the top 3 were free Wi-Fi, comfortable seating, and power outlets or USB ports. So by adding or advertising these features, we can increase transit ridership and persuade people out of their cars. Finally, autonomous shuttles are a cornerstone element in the automated driving systems project, and they're also key to ensuring that no one is left behind in our communities of concern. Through our survey, we learned that 72% are interested in using AV shuttles when they're available. They also have some concerns, however, like wait times and safety. So again, the Innovate project teams will be working to alleviate the concerns and take advantage of this impressive interest level in this alternative mode. So we'd like to close with just a quick look back at our champions of change. We've calculated that if we can get our champions to cut their driving in half, we could reduce the number of drivers on the road by 22%. This translates into a reduction of roughly 37,000 cars per day. And we understand, this is certainly an aspirational number. It's not going to be easy. I would equate it to getting a toddler to eat a salad 3 days a week. Trying to get someone out of their car 3 days a week would be about the same probably. But any shift would help us meet program goals. It would reduce congestion, give us better air, safer roads. And with this research that we're conducting, I think that we can come up with an action plan to help us achieve our Innovate goals.